The rain hammered Neo-Tokyo's chrome and glass towers like digital static made manifest, each droplet refracting the holographic advertisements that painted the night in electric blues and violent pinks. Jake Sullivan pulled his jacket tighter against the artificial wind generated by the city's climate control systems, wondering how a species clever enough to terraform Mars still couldn't figure out how to make weather that didn't feel like being inside a broken air conditioning unit. His neural implant chimed with an incoming message, the text scrolling across his retinal display in that particular shade of amber that meant work. Another corporate espionage gig, probably involving someone's wife sleeping with someone else's trade secrets. The glamorous life of a former military operative turned freelance security consultant. Jake ducked into the Neon Lotus, a cafe that existed in the gray area between respectable and sketchy, where the coffee was real and the questions were kept to a minimum. The place hummed with the white noise of conversation and the subtle vibrations of the maglev trains that ran through the building's foundation every few minutes. He found his usual booth in the back, the one with a clear view of both exits and a scrambler field that would keep any unwanted surveillance from getting too curious. She walked in 10 minutes later, and Jake knew immediately that she was his client because she looked exactly like someone trying very hard not to look suspicious while failing spectacularly at it. Tall, elegant, with that particular way of moving that suggested either dancer training or combat experience. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and when she turned her head slightly, Jake caught sight of her ears. They were pointed, not surgically enhanced pointed, not the subtle genetic modifications that were popular among the body mod crowd, but genuinely, naturally pointed. Long and delicate, like something out of ancient Earth mythology. Jake's hand instinctively moved toward the pulse pistol holstered under his jacket before he caught himself. Rule 1 of survival in Neo-Tokyo: don't draw weapons in public unless you're planning to redecorate the walls with someone's internal organs. She spotted him. How, he wasn't sure, since he'd deliberately chosen the darkest corner of an already dim cafe, and approached with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she'd been planning this conversation for longer than the 20 minutes since her message. "You are Jake Sullivan," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. It wasn't a question. Depends on who's asking and why they want to know. Jake kept his voice neutral, professional. "Though I have to say, that's quite an impressive set of ears you've got there. Fashion statement or genetic lottery?" She blinked, looking genuinely confused. "Fashion statement? I do not understand. Are you implying that the structure of my auditory organs is somehow decorative?" Jake stared at her for a moment. Either she was the most committed method actor in the solar system, or those ears were the real deal. "Right. Sorry. Where I come from, we usually start these conversations with names. I'm Jake, though you apparently already knew that. You are Lyra of the Third Resonance, daughter of the Starweaver clan, seeker of the bond that transcends the void between worlds." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "Though I believe your customs prefer shorter designations, you may call me Lyra. Third Resonance, Starweaver clan. Got it. Very subtle cover identity there, Lyra." Jake signaled the server for 2 coffees, mostly to buy himself time to process what was happening. "So, what kind of trouble are you in that requires the services of someone like me?" Lyra leaned forward, and Jake caught a faint scent that reminded him of ozone and starlight, if starlight had a smell. "I am being hunted by those who travel between the stars, those who believe that love is weakness and connection is corruption. They seek to prevent what must come to pass." "Uh-huh." Jake accepted his coffee from the server, a bored-looking kid with bioluminescent tattoos crawling up his arms. "And what exactly must come to pass?" "The joining of our peoples through the sacred bond of understanding and affection." Lyra wrapped her hands around her coffee cup but didn't drink. "I have come seeking one whose heart is strong enough to bridge the void between worlds, one whose warrior spirit can protect what is precious while learning to embrace what is tender. Jake nearly choked on his coffee. I'm sorry, are you asking me to be some kind of intergalactic dating service? Because I've got to tell you, my success rate with relationships is about as impressive as a chocolate teapot. Chocolate teapot. Lyra's brow furrowed. This is a reference to something that appears functional but fails under practical application. You catch on quick. Jake set down his cup, studying her face. She was serious, completely serious, and that was somehow more unsettling than if she'd been obviously crazy. Look, Lyra, I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but if you're really being hunted by space assassins or whatever, you're going to need more than a washed-up military contractor with trust issues and a questionable sense of humor. You fought in the Proxima Wars, Lyra said quietly. You led the evacuation of Kepler Station when the reactors began to fail. You saved 437 lives that day, including the children in the education pod. Jake's blood went cold. The Kepler Station incident was classified at levels that required security clearance he wasn't sure existed anymore. How do you know about that? My people have been watching, learning, preparing for this moment. Lyra finally lifted her coffee cup, sniffing it with obvious curiosity before taking a tentative sip. Her eyes widened slightly. This beverage is quite stimulating. Is it considered a mild intoxicant among your species? Only if you're not used to it. Jake leaned back in the booth, his mind racing. Your people, right, and they are. The Andorian Collective. We have observed your world for many cycles, studying your customs, your capacity for both creation and destruction. Lyra took another sip of coffee, blinking rapidly. We have concluded that formal contact between our civilizations is inevitable, but the manner of that contact will determine whether it brings harmony or chaos. And you drew the short straw for alien ambassador duty. I volunteered. Lyra's expression grew softer, more vulnerable. Among my people, I am considered unusual. I believe that connection transcends the boundaries of species, that love is a universal force that can heal the wounds between worlds. Most of my kind consider this naive optimism. Jake found himself genuinely curious despite every instinct screaming at him to walk away. What made you think I'd be interested in playing Cosmic Cupid? My romantic history reads like a disaster manual. Because you understand duty and sacrifice, but you have forgotten how to hope. Lyra reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of touching his hand. And because when you saved those children on Kepler Station, you did not do it for glory or recognition. You did it because it was right. The cafe's ambient noise seemed to fade as Jake stared at this strange woman with her impossible ears and her talk of star-spanning civilizations. Part of him wanted to laugh, to chalk this up to another Neo-Tokyo eccentric with too much money and too little sense. But there was something in her eyes, an earnestness that was either completely genuine or the product of acting skills that put professional hologram performers to shame. Assuming for a moment that I believe any of this, Jake said slowly, what exactly are you proposing? Speed dating with the stars? Lyra tilted her head, clearly struggling with the concept. Speed dating. This involves rapid acceleration and romantic courtship simultaneously. Despite everything, Jake felt a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Not exactly. It's a social ritual where people meet potential partners in rapid succession, usually involving awkward small talk and mutual disappointment. Lyra nodded sagely. Like the ritual combat displays we observed in your entertainment broadcasts, but with emotional rather than physical violence. That's actually not a terrible description of modern dating. Jake shook his head. Look, Lyra, even if I believe that you're an alien ambassador looking for love in all the wrong places, why me? There are plenty of people in this city who jump at the chance to play house with someone from another planet. Because you are afraid, Lyra said simply. Not of death or pain or failure, but of allowing yourself to care for someone who might leave. This fear makes you strong, but it also makes you isolated. My people value strength, but they have forgotten the power that comes from choosing vulnerability. Jake stared at her, feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with surveillance or tactical positioning. You've been doing your homework. I have studied your species extensively, particularly the psychological profiles of individuals who display both protective instincts and emotional barriers. Lyra's cheeks flushed slightly, a reaction that seemed entirely human. Though I confess, much of my research was conducted through observation of your entertainment media. I may have developed some misconceptions about human courtship rituals. Oh, this should be good. What kind of misconceptions? Lyra's blush deepened. I was under the impression that romantic connections were typically initiated through elaborate musical numbers or the sharing of large quantities of chocolate. Jake couldn't help himself. He laughed, a genuine sound that surprised him with its warmth. Okay, I can see how you... The maintenance tunnel beneath Neo-Tokyo's financial district smelled like ozone, recycled air, and Jake's growing certainty that his life had taken a hard left turn into the bizarre. He crouched behind a junction box, watching Lyra examine what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary service panel, with the intensity of an archaeologist discovering alien hieroglyphs. So, Jake whispered, checking his pulse pistol's charge level, when you said your people had been observing Earth, exactly how long are we talking about? Because I'm starting to think your intel might be a little outdated. Lyra glanced at him, her pointed ears twitching slightly. We began systematic observation approximately 47 of your years ago, shortly after your species achieved faster-than-light communication. 47 years. Jake stared at her. You've been watching us since before I was born. Indeed, though I should clarify that much of our cultural research was conducted through intercepted broadcast signals. Lyra pressed her palm against the service panel, which immediately began glowing with soft blue patterns. We found your entertainment transmissions particularly illuminating regarding human social dynamics. Jake felt a sinking sensation that had nothing to do with their current hiding spot. What kind of entertainment transmissions? Your romantic comedies were especially educational. We learned that human courtship typically involves elaborate misunderstandings, grand gestures involving precipitous weather conditions, and the strategic deployment of confectionery items. Oh no, Jake closed his eyes. Please tell me, you didn't base your understanding of human relationships on rom-coms. Also dramatic serials featuring medical professionals and legal advocates, Lyra added helpfully. Though we found the violence-to-romance ratios in those programs somewhat concerning. The service panel chimed softly, and a section of the tunnel wall slid open to reveal a passage that definitely hadn't been on any city planning documents Jake had ever seen. Lyra gestured for him to follow, moving into the hidden corridor with the confidence of someone who'd memorized the building schematics. Right, Jake muttered, following her into what appeared to be a maintenance shaft designed by someone with a serious phobia of right angles. So you've been preparing for first contact by watching soap operas and studying architectural blueprints. This should end well. Your skepticism is noted, though I should point out that our escape route predictions based on structural analysis have proven accurate thus far. Lyra paused at a junction, tilting her head as if listening to something Jake couldn't hear. Also, I believe the appropriate human response to successful evasion of hostile forces is celebratory physical contact. Should we engage in what your media terms a high five? Jake found himself grinning despite their circumstances. Maybe after we're not being hunted by mysterious space assassins. They are not assassins, Lyra corrected, leading him through a series of passages that seemed to defy several laws of physics. They are enforcement specialists from the Dominion Collective, a faction of my people who believe that emotional connections weaken the racial purity of thought. Racial purity of thought. Jake ducked under a pipe that hummed with electromagnetic energy. That sounds ominous even by the standards of people shooting at us with particle weapons. The Dominion believes that individual desires corrupt the collective consciousness that has sustained our civilization for millennia. Lyra's voice carried a note of sadness. They view my mission as not merely foolish, but actively dangerous to our species' survival. They emerged into what appeared to be a subway platform that had been abandoned sometime around the last ice age, complete with advertising posters in languages that predated the formation of the United Earth government. Lyra moved to a control panel that looked like it belonged in a museum of ancient technology. "So what's your plan here?" Jake asked, keeping one eye on the tunnel entrances. "Because if this involves more running through mysterious underground passages, I should probably mention that my knees aren't what they used to be. The plan is to reach my ship and establish a secure communication link with the moderate factions of my people." Lyra's fingers danced over controls that responded with musical tones. "Though I confess, the plan did not account for the complexity of human emotional responses to unexpected circumstances." "What do you mean?" Lyra turned to face him, her expression troubled. "According to our research, when humans encounter attractive members of compatible species during high-stress situations, they typically engage in passionate physical displays of affection. Yet you seem remarkably resistant to this predicted behavioral pattern." Jake stared at her. "Are you seriously complaining that I'm not trying to make out with you while we're being hunted by alien death squads?" "Not complaining, precisely. More puzzled." Lyra's cheeks flushed that peculiarly human shade of pink. "Our analysis suggested that the combination of danger, proximity, and mutual attraction would result in what your entertainment media terms romantic tension escalating to physical expression." "Lyra, you realize that movies aren't actually documentaries about how humans behave, right?" "This is becoming apparent," she admitted, "though it does raise questions about the accuracy of our other cultural assessments." A low rumble echoed through the abandoned station, accompanied by the distinctive whine of hover drones scanning for heat signatures. Jake pulled Lyra behind the dubious cover of a rusted vending machine that claimed to dispense something called nutrient cubes, now with real flavor. "How exactly did you get to Earth, anyway?" Jake whispered. "And please tell me your ship isn't parked in the middle of Central Park or something equally conspicuous." "It is currently in a stable orbit around your moon, cloaked within the debris field of an old mining station." Lyra produced her crystalline device again, adjusting settings that made it emit faint harmonic tones. "I arrived via transport beam to a receiving station we constructed in the city's lower levels." "Transport beam?" Jake shook his head. "Of course. And I suppose this receiving station is conveniently located somewhere we can reach without getting shot." "Actually, it is approximately 2 kilometers from our current position, accessible through a network of maintenance tunnels that your city planners seem to have forgotten exist." Lyra peered around the edge of the vending machine. "Though I should mention that the beam platform requires several minutes to cycle between uses, during which time we would be quite vulnerable to attack. Several minutes of standing completely still, while people with military-grade weapons try to kill us." Jake checked his weapon again, noting that his ammunition supply was getting uncomfortably low. "Any other minor details about your escape plan I should know about?" "The transport beam operates by disassembling molecular structures and reconstructing them at the destination coordinates," Lyra said matter-of-factly. "Some humans find the process unsettling." "Unsettling how?" "Complete temporary cessation of biological functions, including consciousness, while your atomic structure is converted to energy and transmitted through subspace." Lyra tilted her head thoughtfully. "Your entertainment media suggests that humans have strong preferences for continuous existence." Jake felt his survival instincts screaming in several different languages. "Lyra, are you telling me that your escape plan involves temporarily killing me and hoping the resurrection process works properly. The success rate is quite high, approximately 97.4% accuracy in molecular reconstruction, and the other 2.6%. Lyra's expression grew uncomfortable. Usually result in minor alterations that resolve themselves within a few days. Extra fingers, temporary color blindness, occasionally brief periods of speaking only in rhyme. Speaking in rhyme, Jake stared at her. You want me to trust my molecular integrity to a process that might turn me into Dr. Seuss? Dr. Seuss was a respected Earth philosopher, was he not? Our cultural analysis indicated high regard for his wisdom among your young people. Before Jake could explain the difference between children's literature and philosophical treatises, the hover drones found them. 3 sleek devices the size of dinner plates descended from the station's upper levels, their scanning beams painting red targeting dots across the abandoned platform. Time for cultural exchange later, Jake muttered, raising his pulse pistol. Right now we've got company. The drones opened fire with energy bursts that turned chunks of ancient concrete into glowing slag. Jake rolled behind a support pillar, returning fire with pulses that sparked off the drone's defensive shields. His shots were accurate, but the damn things were built to military specifications that his civilian-grade weapon couldn't match. Lyra, he called out, any chance that sonic fork of yours works on electronics? It is not a sonic fork, Lyra replied with wounded dignity, even as she crouched behind the questionable cover of a collapsed information kiosk. It is a harmonic resonance amplifier calibrated to influence neural activity through targeted frequency manipulation. Does it work on the drones or not? Uncertain. The technology appears to be based on artificial intelligence matrices that may or may not respond to neurological influence patterns designed for organic consciousness. One of the drones swung around the pillar, its weapons array charging with ominous purpose. Jake dove sideways, feeling the heat from its energy discharge singe the air where his head had been moments before. Well, he gasped, scrambling for new cover. Now would be a great time to find out. Lyra activated her device, and the abandoned station filled with a sound that was less heard than. Jake's apartment had been designed by someone who clearly believed that paranoia was just another word for proper preparation. Triple-locked blast doors, electromagnetic pulse shielding, and enough surveillance countermeasures to make a government black site jealous. What it hadn't been designed for was hosting an alien refugee who kept trying to reorganize his kitchen, according to what she called harmonically optimal spatial arrangements. The resonance patterns are all wrong, Lyra explained, moving his coffee maker for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Your food preparation implements are creating subtle vibrational dissonance that could interfere with proper digestion. It's a coffee maker, not a musical instrument, Jake muttered, checking the security feeds for the 14th time. No sign of pursuit yet, but that probably just meant their hunters were being more careful about their approach. And I like my kitchen the way it is. Your attachment to suboptimal arrangements is noted. Lyra examined his refrigerator with the intensity of an archaeologist discovering a new tomb. Though I must ask, what is the purpose of storing fermented dairy products alongside decomposing plant matter? It's called cheese and leftover pizza, and it's perfectly normal human food storage. Jake activated another layer of his apartment's defensive systems, feeling the subtle hum as the building's structure was reinforced with hard light barriers. Speaking of normal human things, maybe we should talk about this soul-bonding concept you mentioned earlier. Lyra went very still, her pointed ears actually drooping slightly. You wish to discuss intimate psychological connections while consuming fermented dairy products. I wish to understand what I'm getting into before people start shooting at us again. Jake poured himself coffee from his apparently harmonically dissonant machine. Your people form telepathic bonds, right? Mind reading, emotion sharing, that sort of thing. The bond is more complex than simple telepathy. Lyra abandoned her kitchen reorganization project and joined him at the reinforced windows overlooking the city. It is a sharing of essence, a connection that allows two consciousnesses to understand each other completely while remaining distinct individuals. And this is something your people do casually, like human dating, but with extra brain involvement. Lyra's cheeks flushed that peculiar shade of pink that made Jake wonder if embarrassment was a universal constant. The bond is considered sacred among my people, typically reserved for life partnerships or deep spiritual connections. It is not something entered into lightly. But you're looking for a human to bond with as part of some interstellar diplomacy project. Jake studied her face, noting the way she seemed to struggle with her words. That doesn't sound particularly sacred. The mission parameters were not entirely my idea, Lyra admitted. The moderate factions of my people believe that a demonstration of successful human-Andorian bonding could prove to the Dominion that connection strengthens rather than weakens us. They selected me because of my theoretical research on interspecies emotional compatibility. Theoretical research. Jake felt something cold settling in his stomach, meaning you've never actually done this before. I have never attempted to form a soul bond with anyone, human or otherwise. Lyra's voice grew smaller. Among my people, I am considered too emotionally intense for traditional bonding. My research partners found my enthusiasm for connection overwhelming. Jake stared at her. So you're telling me that your people sent you to find a human test subject for an experimental telepathic procedure that you've only read about in books? Academic journals, Lyra corrected weakly, and theoretical modeling simulations. Oh well, theoretical modeling, that makes it much better. Jake set down his coffee with perhaps more force than necessary. Jesus, Lyra, do you have any idea how insane this whole situation is? I am beginning to develop an appreciation for the complexity, yes. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very young and very alone. I may have been somewhat naive about the practical applications of interspecies diplomatic theory. Before Jake could respond, his security system chimed with an incoming priority alert. Multiple heat signatures were converging on the building from 3 different directions, moving with military precision and carrying weapons that registered as significantly above civilian-grade threat levels. How naive were you about the part where we'd be fighting for our lives? Jake asked, activating the apartment's battle protocols. Blast shutters slammed down over the windows, and defensive turrets emerged from hidden panels in the ceiling. That aspect was unfortunately accurate, Lyra said, producing her harmonic device. Though I should mention that prolonged exposure to high-stress situations can sometimes trigger spontaneous bonding attempts in Andorian physiology. Spontaneous bonding attempts. Involuntary telepathic connection during moments of intense emotional synchronization. Lyra's ears twitched nervously. It is considered quite embarrassing among my people. Embarrassing for who? The person doing the involuntary mind melding, or the person getting their brain invaded without permission? Both typically. Jake's security system screamed a warning as something heavy impacted the building's outer wall. The reinforced structure held, but cracks appeared in the hard-light barriers that suggested their attackers had brought significantly upgraded equipment. Right, Jake said, checking his weapons inventory. New rule. If you feel any spontaneous bonding urges coming on, warn me first so I can at least finish shooting the people trying to kill us. I shall endeavor to maintain proper telepathic boundaries during combat situations, Lyra agreed solemnly. Another impact shook the building, this one accompanied by a sound like reality being folded inside out. Jake's defensive turrets swiveled toward the source of the disturbance, but their targeting systems couldn't seem to lock onto whatever was causing the spatial distortions. They're using phase shift technology, Lyra observed, consulting a device that had materialized from somewhere in her jacket. Dominion enforcement specialists are equipped with weapons that operate partially outside normal space-time. Of course they are. Jake grabbed his pulse rifle from its mount, checking the charge levels. Any weaknesses I should know about, specific frequencies that disrupt their equipment, allergies to common household chemicals. Phase shift weapons require enormous energy expenditure and can only maintain dimensional displacement for limited periods. Lyra moved to the apartment's central console, her fingers dancing over controls that Jake was fairly certain he'd never seen before. Also, the Dominion considers the use of humor during combat to be a sign of mental instability. Humor during combat. They believe that laughter indicates compromised tactical judgment and emotional weakness. Lyra's expression grew thoughtful. This may represent an exploitable psychological vulnerability. Jake felt a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Are you suggesting we defeat alien super soldiers by telling them jokes? I am suggesting that their cultural conditioning may make them susceptible to tactical approaches that incorporate unexpected elements of levity. The apartment's front door exploded inward in a shower of twisted metal and exotic energy, revealing three figures in armor that seemed to exist in slightly the wrong dimension. They moved with inhuman coordination, their weapons tracking toward Jake and Lyra with mechanical precision. "Hey," Jake called out, raising his rifle. "How many Dominion enforcement specialists does it take to change a quantum light bulb?" The lead figure paused, clearly confused by the question. Its companions exchanged glances that suggested they were having a telepathic conversation about Jake's apparent mental state. "I don't know," Lyra called back, playing along with an enthusiasm that suggested she'd been waiting her entire life for this moment. "How many?" "None. They just stand around in the dark complaining about how much better things were in their dimension." Jake opened fire while the Dominion soldiers were still trying to process whether this constituted some form of psychological warfare. His pulse rounds sparked off their phase-shifted armor, but the distraction had thrown off their tactical timing. Lyra activated her harmonic device, filling the apartment with resonant frequencies that made the air itself seem to vibrate. The Dominion soldiers staggered, their phase-shift equipment sparking as the harmonic interference disrupted their dimensional displacement. "That was terrible," one of them said in accented English, his voice carrying a note of genuine offense. Humor should serve to illuminate universal truths, not perpetuate stereotypes about interdimensional beings. "Oh, you want better material." Jake rolled behind his couch, which immediately sprouted defensive spikes thanks to his apartment's automated systems. "What do you call a Dominion soldier who's lost his phase-shift equipment?" "This is highly irregular," another soldier complained, raising his weapon. "Combat situations should not involve recreational wordplay." "A regular person." Jake delivered the punchline while putting 3 pulse-round center mass on the complaining soldier, whose armor finally failed under the sustained assault. The remaining 2 soldiers looked at each other with what Jake was beginning to recognize as the universal expression of beings who were questioning their life choices. "These humans are clearly suffering from combat-induced psychological trauma," the lead soldier announced. "We should perhaps consider a more therapeutic approach to this engagement." "Therapeutic?" Lyra asked, adjusting her harmonic device to a frequency that made the apartment's metal fixtures ring like wind chimes. "Are you offering to discuss our feelings about this situation?" "Well, if you're experiencing stress related to interspecies diplomatic initiatives, there are healthy ways to process those emotions that don't involve forming inappropriate psychological bonds with primitive." The abandoned orbital station had been dead for 15 years. Its corridors dark and pressurized only by the emergency systems that Jake was beginning to suspect weren't entirely human in origin. He floated through the zero-gravity maintenance shaft, trying not to think about how many ways this plan could go catastrophically wrong. "Remind me again why we thought coming to a haunted space station was a good idea." He whispered into his comm, watching Lyra glide ahead of him with the kind of graceful movement that suggested she'd been born for zero-G environments. The station's quantum resonance chambers will amplify the soul bond connection, allowing us to demonstrate its stability to both our peoples simultaneously, Lyra replied, her voice crackling slightly through the interference of the station's ancient systems. Also, the Dominion forces will have difficulty using their phase shift technology in an environment with this much residual quantum distortion. Right, and the part where we're essentially broadcasting our private thoughts to two entire civilizations. That aspect is admittedly concerning. Lyra paused at a junction, consulting her ever-present array of devices. Though I should mention that successful completion of the bond will make it quite difficult for either side to argue that human-Andorian connections are inherently dangerous. Because we'll either prove them wrong or die horribly trying. Your grasp of the strategic implications is improving. They emerged into what had once been the station's central hub, a vast spherical chamber lined with quantum resonance arrays that hummed with dormant power. Jake could see Earth through the transparent aluminum viewports, a blue marble hanging in the void, while the moon glowed silver in the distance. "You know," he said, activating his magnetic boots as they reached the chamber's control center, "when I woke up this morning, I thought the biggest decision I'd have to make was whether to put sugar in my coffee." "Dairy products," Lyra corrected absently, beginning to power up the resonance arrays. "You consume dairy products in your coffee, not sugar." "Both, actually. I like my coffee the way I like my relationships, complicated and probably bad for me." An interesting philosophical perspective. Lyra's fingers danced over controls that responded with increasingly complex harmonic patterns. "Though I should point out that our current situation suggests your relationship preferences may be evolving." Jake was about to respond when the station's communication array crackled to life, displaying two very different sets of faces on the main view screen. On the left, a group of humans in what appeared to be the Situation Room of the United Earth government. On the right, beings that looked like Lyra, but with more elaborate clothing and expressions that suggested they'd been having a very long, very serious discussion. "Jake Sullivan," said a woman with enough medals on her uniform to stop small arms fire. "I'm General Morrison, Earth Defense Command. We need to know what your intentions are regarding the alien presence in our system." "Our intentions?" Jake looked at Lyra, who was making final adjustments to the quantum arrays. "I'm not entirely sure I know what our intentions are." "The human speaks truth," said an Andorian with elaborate patterns tattooed around his elongated ears. "This bonding attempt proceeds without proper authorization from either governing body. Such reckless behavior could destabilize the carefully maintained isolation protocol that have protected both our civilizations. Isolation protocols that have left both our peoples stagnant and afraid," Lyra said firmly, not looking up from her work. "When did we become so terrified of connection that we chose loneliness over growth?" "Connection brings chaos," another Andorian voice added. "Individual desires compromise collective harmony. This has been established doctrine for millennia." "Your established doctrine," Jake said, floating closer to the quantum array's central node, "sounds like something someone made up because they were afraid to take emotional risks." "Emotional risks?" General Morrison's expression suggested she was questioning every decision that had led to this conversation. "Soldier, are you telling me you're about to undergo some kind of alien psychological experiment for the sake of emotional risks?" "I'm telling you that maybe the biggest risk is spending your whole life afraid to care about someone." Jake looked at Lyra, who was watching him with an expression that managed to combine hope, terror, and something that might have been love. "Besides, it's not like my track record with normal relationships was particularly impressive." "This is highly irregular," one of the Earth officials muttered. "We should be conducting proper diplomatic protocols, establishing formal contact procedures." You've had 47 years to establish formal contact procedures, Lyra interrupted, activating another section of the array. How much longer did you plan to wait? Another century, another millennium. The quantum resonance chambers began humming with increasing intensity, filling the station with harmonics that seemed to resonate in Jake's bones. He could feel something shifting in his perception, as if reality was becoming more flexible around the edges. Lyra, he said quietly, whatever happens, I want you to know that this is the most terrified I've ever been, and also the most certain that I'm doing the right thing. That, she replied, is exactly how I hoped you would feel. Begin the resonance cascade. One of the Andorians commanded, though Jake couldn't tell if they were giving permission or trying to prevent something. Lyra placed her hand on the central node, and Jake covered it with his own. The station's ancient systems responded immediately, flooding the chamber with energy that existed somewhere between light and sound and pure possibility. The first sensation was warmth, spreading from their joined hands up through Jake's arm and into his chest. Then came awareness, not of Lyra's thoughts exactly, but of her presence in his mind, careful and curious and surprisingly gentle. Hello, her voice said, though her lips hadn't moved. Hey there, Jake thought back, marveling at how natural it felt. This is less invasive than I expected. I am attempting to be respectful of your cognitive boundaries. He could sense her amusement, threaded through with affection and wonder. Though I must admit, your mind is far more complex than our research suggested. Gee, thanks, you're not so bad yourself. The resonance cascade intensified, and suddenly Jake could perceive the entirety of the station, every system and circuit and quantum fluctuation. Beyond that, he sensed the approaching ships, Dominion enforcement vessels on one side, Earth defense forces on the other, all converging on their position with weapons powered and intentions unclear. They're coming, Lyra observed, her mental voice carrying overtones of concern. Both sides appear to be preparing for armed conflict. Yeah, well, that's what people do when they're scared. Jake felt his awareness expanding further, touching the edges of the communication feeds that connected them to both civilizations. Question is, are we going to give them something to be scared of, or something to hope for? Through the bond, he could sense Lyra's sudden understanding. She wasn't just connected to him now. They were connected to the quantum resonance array, which was connected to the communication networks, which meant, we can show them, she realized. Not just tell them about the bond, but let them experience what it actually feels like. Is that a good idea? Because I've got to warn you, there's some seriously questionable stuff in my head that I'm not sure either of our species is ready for. Such as, Jake let her sense his memories, not just the battles and the losses, but the quiet moments of connection he'd shared with others over the years. The time he'd held a dying soldier's hand on Kepler Station. The way he'd felt when he realized his ex-wife was afraid of who he was becoming. The loneliness that had driven him to accept impossible jobs and questionable clients just to avoid spending time alone with his thoughts. Oh, Lyra whispered mentally, Jake, this is not questionable. This is beautiful. It's messy. Yes, wonderfully, necessarily messy. Her presence in his mind grew stronger, more confident. This is exactly what our peoples need to understand. That connection doesn't require perfection, only the courage to be vulnerable. The quantum cascade reached its peak, and suddenly their joined consciousness exploded outward through the communication networks. Jake felt the startled reactions of the Earth officials as they suddenly experienced, however briefly, the sensation of perfect understanding with another being. He sensed the shock of the Andorians as they felt human emotion unfiltered by cultural barriers or species prejudice. This is most irregular, came the mental voice of the Dominion leader, though Jake could sense uncertainty beneath the formal disapproval. Irregular, Jake thought back, letting his amusement ripple through the connection. This is two people who decided to stop being afraid of caring about each other. If that's irregular, maybe regular is the problem. Through the bond, he felt the approaching ships slow their advance. Not stopping, but hesitating, their crews suddenly confronted with sensations and perspectives that challenged everything they'd been taught about the impossibility of true interspecies understanding. The psychological integration appears stable, observed one of the Earth scientists, her mental voice tinged with wonder. There's no indication of cognitive damage or personality dissolution. Indeed, added an Andorian researcher, the human consciousness remains distinctly human while achieving unprecedented levels of empathetic connection. This should not be possible according to our theoretical models. Maybe, Lyra suggested gently, your theoretical models were missing